Hey, welcome to Perspectives. I'm going to just share some things here with you today. I'm cutting this on Monday morning, September 22nd. So it's right after the memorial for Charlie Kirk happened yesterday. And I'm going to share an interview with you that I did with an old friend of mine named Hutz, who actually works on the leadership team of Turning Point USA. And so I think he's a really good person to hear from, just somebody who knew Charlie personally, has been involved in the mission, able to just kind of speak to him as a person. And the reason I'm setting this up this way is I'd love just to encourage you just today to reflect not on Charlie, the cultural phenomenon, or the sides that people take, but to just reflect on how God used him, who he was as a person. If you watch some of the memorial, you probably got a lot of that. But here was my moment with the memorial. I was watching football a little bit, and I turned over to it just as Erica Kirk started to speak. And then I listened to her, and I listened to Donald Trump, both in real time. And I did not spend time going back and listening to all the other speakers. So my takeaway is narrow, but I did see kind of it had some worship components, kind of a real strong Christian narrative message, which was really cool. And then I saw the moment when Erica Kirk said, "I forgive my husband's murderer." And I thought that is so courageous, so beautiful, so Christian to say, this is what I'm called to do. And you could almost see, it seemed like she struggled to say it. She knew it was right. She knew it's what she wanted to say. She said, we need to lead with love. And it was a moment that was hard to not, regardless of where somebody was politically, just to say, there's the display of what I hope Christianity is. And then just a few minutes later, Donald Trump gets up to talk. And I realize any critique of Donald Trump is always dangerous. But I don't think I'm out of bounds here when he basically said, yeah, I kind of heard all this, but I hate my enemies. And the moment that was kind of emblematic of something here was all of a sudden you heard this cheering from the same crowd that a few moments before it had their arms up and was singing praise songs. And now I don't know that it's all the same people, but there was cheering. And I thought, what a juxtaposition. I'm going to take God's command seriously and say, I am going to forgive my husband's killer, and I am going to advocate for love. And then the same moment, just a few moments later, you get this I hate my enemies. Yay, this is great. Now, again, there might be more connected to this than what I'm saying, but I think it just highlights the challenge right now of thinking about Charlie Kirk as a cultural phenomenon. And so take in just a little bit of this from somebody who is close to Charlie, close to the mission, and maybe hear the heart and the desire of this. And this is a perspective I hope is helpful to all of us as we walk through these days. So obviously, Charlie personally and work with him closely. Tell us just about the tragedy, how it's hitting you, how it's hitting those close to Charlie, and just how you're all doing and how you're responding.
Yes, well, I can tell you, Kurt, that it seems surreal. I think there's many of us that are still numb to it. But I'm talking to you right now from our Phoenix headquarters. We have several hundred staff members here. They were offered the opportunity to take this week off. 99% of the staff, hundreds, are here in our 6 office buildings down here. And I would characterize it by a greater sense of resolve and commitment and focus than we even had previously, which is hard to believe. Okay. And the numbers that I could share with you of inquiries, of interest, expressions at every different level, even in our division, it would be, just unbelievable. And so the response around the world, our country, just really shows the impact of a life lived first and foremost for the glory of God, but also for conservative values and principles. And So yes, we're reeling, but we're more committed than ever.
Okay. And when you say more committed than ever, what is that commitment to? Like what is the mission that so many people feel drawn to, with this and committed to?
Well, there was no question that Charlie was committed to Judeo-Christian values. He himself was a committed Christian that motivated and really gave voice to virtually everything that he did. I can tell you from knowing him very personally that that really truly was the driving factor and force in Charlie's life. In the last couple of years, at least, but probably going back more than the last couple of years, I never heard Charlie speak without talking about his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And even the day that he was assassinated, just a little over a week ago from when I'm talking to you right now, the very first question at Utah Valley University was, Charlie, could you explain the difference between your evangelical Christian faith and my Mormonism? Something to that effect. And for 15 minutes, Charlie patiently, beautifully laid out the gospel. And then, of course, the second question was about transgender violence, and that's when he was shot. But I say all of that, and there's a lot more that I could say about Charlie's faith, and maybe there'll be time to do that, Kurt. But that really has motivated the organization, not just now, but really pretty much since the inception, but certainly in these last several years. But it also fuels our understanding of our heritage of our country and to fight for the values that our country was founded on: freedom and equality and justice for all, and to make sure that those kinds of values are still predominant, and that there's room for voice, and there's room for dissent, and there's room for free speech and those kinds of things, and to be able to speak the truth without fear of reprisal, without fear of being canceled or doxxed or worse, in Charlie's case. And so Charlie was a courageous model for all of us in speaking the truth, and ultimately, along with his Christian faith, he ended up giving his life for that.
Okay. Yeah, it's certainly, it's hard to even think about the significance of this assassination. I was thinking about it, and in my lifetime, I don't think there has been assassination of this significance. There have been attempts, obviously, on President Trump, President Reagan, but since 1968, when I think we had RFK, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., we really haven't had somebody with the prominence and kind of the voice of a movement have their life taken in an act of political violence. There have been those moments, but not with the same significance. And so tell us just how you see the significance of the moment given that context. Like what does it mean moving forward, and looking back?
Yeah, you're right, Kurt, in terms of the significance of this terrible event. The thing that I most equate it to is 9/11, but obviously that's a little bit apples and oranges. That was an event. This is a person, but that created an openness, a sensitivity, if you will, to the things of God, eternal perspective. If you recall that, and so there was a window where people were drawn back to church, drawn reading the Bible, drawn to about eternal things, and so we're seeing a lot of that right now. And so the question will be, will that impact remain? And I think there's many of us that are optimistic that to a large degree we think it will, because for all these years, and it wasn't just Charlie, all the folks in our organization have been sowing seeds of the values that we're talking about today in the lives of literally hundreds of thousands of students primarily, but not just students, a lot of older adults, middle-aged adults. And so, the hope is now that these folks will step up and be more courageous and bold in sharing their faith, sharing the values of what this country was founded on, that they would not be silent, that they would speak against the dark and the evils of our country and not just remain on the sidelines. And honestly, so many Christians, would say, Kurt, that yes, the family is very, very important. We all agree with that. Church is very, very important. We all agree with that. But God also ordained the institution of government. And when it comes to government, for whatever reason, Christians have shied away from being engaged in the public square, in government. That's dirty. That's, we leave that to secular people. And Charlie was a voice saying, no, God is calling us into all spheres of society, to all spheres of life, and including government and including politics. And so I think he's really helped give an example that it's not unchristian to be involved in that part of life. It is an expression of our Christian faith. It's really an expression of the gospel to be involved in all spheres of public life. And so I think that will be part of this legacy. You asked me what will be part of the legacy. I think that will be part of the legacy, but time will tell. Time will tell. And I can tell you as an organization, we're going to do everything we can to help continue to fuel that as best that we can.
What would be the takeaway for somebody who is, a person of faith and they see that Charlie was, assassinated and certainly for his beliefs and speaking out on them. So, full of conviction on that. What do you think should be the takeaway or the lasting lesson that people would have?
Yeah, great question. And I can tell you what Charlie would not want it to be. He would not want people to shrink back now and to be quiet because they're ultimately afraid of what's going to happen to him. May not be exactly the same fate as Charlie's, but, as we said earlier, maybe silenced, doxxed, maybe ridiculed, canceled. Charlie would not want that. What Charlie would want instead would be men and women, and especially men and women of faith, Christian faith, to be bold and courageous, to be willing to speak truth in the darkness and not shrink back from that. And so many people are willing to speak to things that are comfortable to comfortable audiences. Charlie went to the hardest audiences, especially on college campuses, as you well know, Kurt. And he spoke to people that were opposed to what he was saying. And he always invited those that were opposed to come to the front of the line and to speak and to ask their questions. And I saw that many, many times. And so he allowed for civil discourse. He welcomed it, but he did not back down from his faith, his convictions, the truth that he believed. I saw him do it many, many times. And so he would want us to have that same courage of our convictions, to speak to the evils of our world, to understand. And Charlie fully understood this, Kurt, that we're in a spiritual battle. And so to understand that, and that we as Christians need to bring light into the darkness. We're only with the light. We're never going to bring light into the darkness. Charlie sought to bring the light into the darkness. And so he would want that. But most of all, what he would want is for people to come to know the Savior that he loved. And he was asked the question, Charlie, what do you want to be known for? And he said succinctly, I would like to be known as a person of courageous faith. And that really, truly was Charlie. He had death threats virtually every week. He had to have 24/7 security. But that didn't stop him from going to hard places, Kurt.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
he did.
No, I think that's certainly a great takeaway. Is just saying, there's a time to speak. And I was just scrolling through my phone here to try to find an article I read at Tangle the other day, which is a website that kind of gives you what the left media says, the right media says, and then the editor says, here's what I think. And he went on and on at the end of his article talking about how Charlie Kirk, from his view, was a master at actually listening to people, empathizing. That he said, when he first heard about Charlie, and I'm going to summarize, so this will be way off, but he said, I kind of thought I was just going to get this bombastic blowhard because the clips you see, he said, are very forceful. But he said, when I watched him interact on college campuses and things, what I would see him do is actually engage people, listen to them, say, that's a good point, but have you considered this? And that although he was very bold, he also had a real gift to be able to engage people in a dialogue that was actually authentic. And I thought that was an interesting point. And when I went back to the website today, he had to post another thing about all the critique he's getting for basically saying Charlie was good at this. And he said, all my readers are upset that I'm saying anything nice about Charlie Kirk. But I thought it was interesting because, best I can tell, he's not writing from a Christian perspective. He's just simply trying to call it like he sees it and saying, yeah, here's what the left said, here's what the right said. But what I saw was somebody who engaged in free speech, and that is something that we should be thankful for and celebrate rather than denigrate in any way. And I think there's something good for Christians and non-Christians to hear in that, to say, we should be a country that can debate ideas. And that is something Charlie did really well. And whether you agree with every idea or not, he went out and said, let's have a conversation and let's respect each other enough to have it. Even what was it? I think he was criticized, Charlie was, for going on what Gavin Newsom's podcast when Gavin started that. Like, how could you? And again, it seemed like his whole thing was, well, why wouldn't I? What else do you want to? Who else do you want to talk to? Because if we're about the free exchange of ideas, then we need to have dialogue. And I think too often the flip side, and it's interesting because I think some people are using Charlie's message almost to do this, is to say, let's shut down dialogue and let's virtue signal. And it seems to me Charlie was the opposite of that in reality, where he was saying, let's talk, let's have a conversation, let's debate it. You think this, I think this. Let's talk and figure out if we can get closer to truth. And again, I think that's a commendable thing to both Christian and non-Christian alike.
Yeah, that's well said, Kurt. In fact, Charlie had said, when the conversation stops, that's when the violence begins. And so you're exactly right. And so Charlie he really did embody that. And so much of the negative critique is from people that never really listened to Charlie, never really heard him, never saw him in action, as I had the privilege of doing now for these last few years. And to see the way he, just as you said, with grace and with patience, listen to some of the most asinine questions you ever want to ask, and yet he would answer those patiently with respect. And if the crowd would ever jeer at somebody who asked a antagonistic question like that, Charlie would quiet the crowd and say, guys, no, let him ask the question, please stop, so he can ask his question. Let's treat him with respect. So again, I'm just telling you from firsthand observation, Kurt, that truly was who he was. And again, no one is saying Charlie is perfect. None of us are perfect, but he did that day after day, week after week, year after year for 13 years. And so the overall body of his work really gives credence and evidence that that's who he was. And so hopefully that legacy will continue. And I hope it does. I'm somewhat optimistic, but we'll see. Time will tell.
Yeah. Well, anything else you want to add or just say, just for people here in Western Pennsylvania and around the internet, that they might be interested in or need to know, or be a good word from kind of those close to the situation?
Yeah. Well, Kurt, first of all, you're embodying the very kinds of things that we're talking about, and giving me, as well as, of course, others that you have on your program, the opportunity to share and to talk about things that may be either new information or different than what your listeners maybe are used to hearing. Who knows? So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to do that. I think, again, as we remember Charlie and, the impact we're seeing around the world, as I said at the beginning, I could share numbers with you that I don't think people would believe. I'll just share one with you. We've heard from, just in my division, 196 countries around the world. So there's something about, Charlie's life and impact that has resonated with people, young people, but not just young people, not just people now in the United States, around the world. There was 1.4 million person rally in downtown London not too long ago, just a couple of days ago. So, what can we take away from that? I think it's the very kinds of things that we're talking, but the thing that Charlie would want me to say more than anything else is that it's your relationship with the Lord that is the most important thing. That drives everything. And that relationship with the Lord should be the motivation to love your wife, to love your children, to be a good churchman, to read the Bible. Charlie was reading his Bible. I talked to my colleague who was on the flight with Charlie from Phoenix up to Utah. He was reading his Bible 2 hours, that 2-hour flight, texting his pastor with questions. He would want you to read your Bible, to be involved in church. But Charlie would also say, Don't leave your faith there. Bring your faith to bear in the grocery store. Bring your faith to bear in the marketplace. Bring your faith to bear on the college campus. Bring your faith to bear in your school. Be a light where the Lord has placed you, and don't be shut down. Have the courage of your convictions. Know that the Lord is with you. He will embolden you, be with you. And yeah, you're going to take some hits likely, but you know what? The darkness hates the light. And so that should not be the reason that we stop. And so hopefully that'll provide, Charlie's life will continue to provide that kind of motivation and encouragement for courage and bringing our faith to bear in every sector of life, including the public square.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for making time on a busy day, busy week for you, and a sad week. And I'm sorry for your loss personally, and those of you who, certainly lived in proximity to Charlie. Thank you all for spending part of your day with us here on Perspectives. For more content, you can always go to orchardhillchurch.com, and then follow Orchard Hill Plus there, and you will find all of the bonus content that goes well beyond the weekend. And thank you again for joining us.